I grew up in a broken home, and my parents always disagreed with each other. They never could quite get along. And this made me feel pulled apart, like I had to choose one side, and as if I could only love one parent at a time. Like, it was as if whenever I was with my mom, that was the only person I was able to love. That's only who I could be allowed to love. But then whenever I was with my dad, I could only love him. And so after a while, I tried an escapism route by using video games to make that my whole world. And the problem with this was I started playing video games so much and too much, to the point where I would eat roughly only about one snack a day and only get 4 hours of sleep every night. And I just pretty much became addicted to video games. I thought that was my whole life. And around this time too, I had to make trips back and forth between my mom, and they lived 6 hours away from each other, and I had to make this bi-weekly, and this was really hard on me at this young age. And so after a while I got tired of this, and so I thought if I moved in with my dad, life would just be perfect. I could do whatever I want, never get in trouble, just, live in fantasy land, if you will. Well, that happened. At age 9, I moved away from my mom to my dad, and for a little while I was fine with it, and then eventually I started to get disappointed. At age 10, pride started to build in me, and so what I started to do was I began messing with Wiccanry, which is a form of witchcraft. And with this, I started learning spell work, and then whenever I casted my first spell, for a moment I was proud, but then after the short few seconds of pride faded, I realized what I did was just so dark. And so after that, I ran from that, and realizing that wouldn't work, and then I tried to actually run away from home 11 miles that day. And with that, I came home to a father. My father is not one of your average tough guys, if you will, but he doesn't like to cry. But with this, he brought me home in open arms. He did not scold me. He wasn't like, "You better never do this again. What is wrong with you?" Instead, he brought me home into open arms, gave me a warm meal, and cried because he was so happy to have me back home safe. But I still didn't recognize love for some reason. Still so confused. So after a while, this was my first time with depression. And at this age, at age 10, I began cutting myself because I found online that if you do this, it's gonna release all of your negative energy and stuff. Well, that didn't work for me. It led to more disappointment. And so then I had my first attempt in suicide, but God saved my life. He made it so I didn't even have injury with it. So after this, I just became more and more disappointed. So then I thought I would use my original tactic and move away again. So at age 12, I moved back in with my mom. And this was where I started to have an odd relationship with Jesus. In other words, I had an affection for him, but I wasn't really ready to actually be a Christian. Even with sin, for example, I looked at it like, well, Jesus is going to forgive me, so why say sorry? What's the point? I don't get it. And I wouldn't even try. I would literally walk bold-faced into something that was sinful, and I knew it, but I just didn't care. I never said sorry, even just a simple fake sorry. I never even did that. And after this, my pride just began to build more and more. And I had a friend who was a very good friend of mine. And I looked into his life, and I kept pointing out for 2 hours one night, just kept pointing out what he was doing wrong, you should stop doing this, 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 and this. And not in a loving way, really, in a way of like anger and resentment. And after that, we never spoke again because of my pride. At age 13, this was where I started to have a big identity struggle. This is where I started worrying about my identity, thinking I should be like him or her, or wait, just going on and on and on about who I was, but never settling with it. And then I experimented with homosexuality, thinking that this would be the me that was tucked away, and I would just be the new me. Well, that didn't work out for me, and disappointment came. And so after a while, things kind of settled down for a moment. I was just, living normal life again for a moment. And then I found contact online with a sexual predator. And she told me that she loved me and that I was her everything, and I believed her, and she became, at the time I took her as my everything. And I believed everything she told me, even if it was outright nothing. In fact, before I met her, I had an interest in vampire books and stuff like that, but I took them for what they were: books, movies, nothing else. And then she ran me through this test saying that, well, they are real. They're not like the movies, but they're real. And I believed her, and I believed I was one for a long time, drinking my own blood and friends as well. And so through this, after people found out, we obviously had to split up. We couldn't talk anymore. This crushed me, and after this moment, after this little time, demons came to me. But I want to tell you guys what these demons were like. They weren't scary looking, they weren't horrifying, and honestly, one of them, there were two, and one of them was actually very kind to me. He told me to do everything that would help me, but it actually just kept hurting me. And there was another one who would call me freak. And then they used an excuse. They used an excuse to make me think that they weren't demons, because I even questioned that a couple of times in my own mind. They said, no, you're schizophrenic, and you made us in your depression so that way we can be your friends in your back pocket. That's all. We're just you. And they came actually looking like me, just like me, so I believed them. And well, I continued on with this for months and months and months, but then I could just take no more. And on the night of October 8th, 2017, I was sitting in my room journaling, but then I didn't even finish the journal. I just threw it aside, and I was just hopeless. I remember even kind of saying out loud quietly, I don't want to do this anymore. And so one of the demons, Mark is what he said his name was, came to me and said, well, you know where the 38 revolver is. Go get it. It'll be quick. It'll be painless. Just go do it. And so I went and looked for it in the usual spot. It wasn't there. And so I went back to my room just completely, even more hopeless, thinking, I can't even do that right? Really? Great. And then they came to me again. And the one that usually taunted me was even kind to me on this night, if you will. He didn't call me a freak anymore, a schizophrenic anymore. Instead, he just came to me and, they both told me, hey, go look in the glove box in the car. That's where it is. But don't go out the door, it'll creak. Go out of your window. And at first I rolled my eyes at this idea. I was like, oh my gosh, this is not true. How could they know anything more than me? Because obviously, I thought I was schizophrenic at this time. So then, eventually I just gave up and I said, well, I guess it's worth a shot. Let's just go look. And so I crept out the window and went to the car, and then I opened the glove box, And I stood there and looked at it in awe for a second because it was right there. And I had no idea that it had been moved. So then I grabbed it, put it in my jacket pocket, and I went into the barn that night. And then I sat there looking at it, and I was nervous to do it, of course, for a minute. But then they came to me again and gave me a, air quotes, dialectical, therapeutic way of dealing with that. They said, take all the bullets out, put it up to your head, and then just keep pulling the trigger and pulling the hammer back, and just get comfortable with it. Make it a toy. Play with it. And so I did for a while, and then whenever I got comfortable with it, I put the bullets back in and did it without hesitation. But God, He saved me that night. He moved that gun because I'm a bilateral self-inflicted gunshot wound survivor. In other words, bilateral doesn't mean that it went in my temple here and then came out of my forehead or eye or anything. It went in my right temple and came out a bit below my left. It went all the way through. And what I intended for a selfish, way out, what Satan intended for, honestly, my death, a true death, I probably would have honestly ended up in hell too. God intended for good. And Mom even was changed whenever she found me. Days into the hospital, she came to God and she started praying over me and reading scripture over me. And whenever we came home, I was still kind of the way I was. I still thought that the sexual predator loved me and I wanted her back. And I was listening to a certain type of music that wasn't even just a couple of cuss words thrown around in there. I'm talking, this music was literally about vulgar murder. Very descriptive. And I just thought it was fine. It's just music, right? I can listen to it all the time. All the time. But I just kept believing this way for a while, but Mom kept reading scripture and praying over me, even if I didn't want to hear it. And then Mom, eventually, she scheduled a baptism for me. And in this baptism, this is where the Holy Spirit really touched me. Because I feel that God opened my eyes in this moment, because this was the first time I really felt the Holy Spirit. I realized that I should rethink all of this. I realized that this woman that I was dating online, she did not really love me. She just wanted me for her body. She just wanted me for my body. And that's it. And this music, I sat in my bed, and instead of listening to it and dissecting the words and all that, I literally looked up the lyrics and just read it like that. And it was dark to me. And because of this, it's been a slow recovery, but God has restored my mind this way. And now even on the bad days, I don't hold on to this thing anymore. I'll honestly be, the longest I've ever held on to it from what I remember is about 20, 30 minutes. And then I let it go. And now God is something different to me too. It's not just, Jesus died for my sins a long time ago, so why care about sin? I'm not constantly looking over my shoulder thinking, oh gosh, did I just sin? But whenever I sin, and I know I have, or I don't know I have, I still come to Jesus and truly repent. I truly try to say I'm sorry, and I try not to do it again. I might, but I try not to. And God has even given me being blind as a blessing, because one thing I want to say is He's given me sight in a new way with echolocation, because I've learned that bats are not the only ones who can do it. People can do it too, even sighted people. You'd have to blindfold yourself, but you can do it. And it's a new way to see the world, as long as it's a physical object, I can see it. And the only thing I need to do is practice with it. And with this, furthermore, I feel like I've lost my physical sight, but I've gotten my spiritual sight. And that, I may go my whole life without ever being able to see again, of course. whether, I might not get my sight back, whether that be through technology or just being healed up. But that's okay with me because the first face that I do get to see is Jesus Christ.
That's right.
I get to see his face. And because of this, I just feel like my whole life has been restored. But I want to let everyone know here that I, Pagiel Griffith, I am not special. I am not any more special than any one of you in God's eyes. In other words, you don't have to do what I did to regain joy or happiness if you've lost that. You don't have to put a .38 revolver or worse up to your head and pull the trigger like this. No, because God loves you. And Jesus came. He did indeed come to save our eternity, but our eternity does not start in the future. Our eternity does not start whenever he comes and picks us up. Our eternity starts when you're saved. In other words, now, in this life. And he wants you to not get lost in the world, but God did make this world for us to enjoy. He does love us all. And with rules, he did set aside things for us to follow, but he understands that we can't always follow it. So he doesn't look at us like, ooh, you sin too much in your life, you're going to hell. No, it's, well, I see that you've sinned, but I forgive you. And now, my friend Dave may have a few words.
Sometimes I don't know what to say. Thanks, Pagiel. I'm an author, and I was on a forum on Facebook, and his mom had written on Facebook that she was looking for somebody to write his story, and I just happened across it. I'd never known them. They're from Georgia, and we were living on the road at the time, traveling. And so I just came across it. Well, she had deleted it about as quick as she put it on, but I already had caught it. So I responded, and when she started telling me the story, I was just blown away. We all hear stories all the time of somebody who has had some great tragedy, some horrible car accident, some terrible thing that's happened in their life, and they survived it through some miraculous way, and that's fantastic. But what's changed in their life? Has God done, have they given their lives to God? Has God done anything in their lives, or do they just go back to the life they were living? When I heard this story, it not only, as Pagiel said, God not only saved his life, but God saved his mind and his soul. And that's a story worth telling, because we need that in our country today. We need stories where we know that God is alive and active and doing things in people's lives. So it didn't take me too long to get there and spend time with the family and get to know them and write the story. And now Pagiel and I are kind of touring around. He's telling the story. It's making a difference. Definitely making a difference. But since we're just sitting around a campfire, we're just wide open to thoughts, ideas, conversation.
Dave, tell us more about his injury, because it's a miracle that he's even alive. A .38 caliber
38 caliber
should have
revolver.
killed him.
Yep.
But tell us more about his injury, because it's a miracle that he's talking, that he's...
His you can see the scar there, that's to the right.
Yeah.
That's where it was entered. And then all the way across there. So it's not just across the forehead, it's right through the middle of the head. A .38 caliber bullet should have scrambled his brains completely. That portion of the brain is emotion, voice inflection, sexual drive, anything having to do with interpersonal relationship in any way at all. All of that ability should have been completely wiped out. Should have been killed, no question. But even alive, he shouldn't have any ability to function with other people, relate with people. But God saw fit to position the gun in such a way that Pagiel lost his physical eyesight, and nothing more.
That's all I've lost, other than my right eye, but honestly, my father, he paid for it. he paid for a new one. So
Got a nice plastic one in there that scares the kids.
He also lost his sinuses, though.
Lost his
You had
sinuses,
said.
true.
well, they did rebuild those.
The
Okay.
what?
Lost his sense of smell.
Oh, okay.
Yep. Which is handy when we're traveling together.
Yeah, big time. You don't have to smell skunks anymore. Right? Well, I know an awesome miracle story, and I've heard a lot of miracle stories. And so, and what's cool about it is that we know that God has a plan for us when He gets us through anything we go through.
Yep.
And in Joel 2:25 tells us, "I will repay you the years that the enemy has taken from you." And he's got that. He's got that in his heart. I can tell it in his spirit. That he's gonna, because Jesus says, "You will do greater things than these." That means us. We're the hands and feet of Jesus. I shared with somebody. I said, "We're God with skin on" once, and this guy got all mad. He says, "Tell me where that is in the Bible." And you're not God with skin on. You're not God. But when Jesus says, "You will do greater things than these," He meant that we're going to do His works. So we all have different gifts. Some can heal, some can speak, some can teach, some can preach. Some, we all have gifts, and we're supposed to use them. And Isaiah 43:18, and this is something I'd like to share with you. God put this on my heart to tell you that. In Isaiah 43:18, He tells us not to remember former things, nor to consider things of old. The bullet's been shot, literally, for him. But in retrospect, anything we've done, we can't take it back. We can't fix it. It's done. It's gone. And we're supposed to press forward. And He says, "Shall you not know it? I'll make new roads in the wilderness and rivers in the deserts." And that's what God has for us. And when, just like Angel said, when we accept that salvation, and that's what's huge about this whole thing. So, man, I'm very, very blessed to be here. You're a blessing to me right now, and
I asked him what happened to Mark and David because the demons had names.
Yeah.
They actually gave names.
Right. Well, with what happened with them here's the interesting thing is I still had some draw to the darkness after my well, not after my recovery, but during my recovery, before my baptism, but I never saw nor heard them again after the night in the barn. I feel like God ripped them away from me.
oh, sure.
Pagiel, tell us how you saw them. Most of us think of, oh yeah, he probably was just seeing in his mind or he's imagining things. How did you see it?
The way I saw it is, it's kind of hard to describe, but it's as if I could see what was behind them, but I could not see through them. And the way they looked to me was the air quotes nice one was he always wore a white hoodie, and then the one who was just straight up with me, he always wore a black hoodie, and they both looked exactly like me, and they came to me as my friends. I thought they were my friends, good friends in my back pocket all the time, and I could just talk to them whenever I want. I don't even have to talk to them out loud. But issue being with that is they act like friends, but they were not my friends.
Did they come and go, or were they always there?
They kind of came and went, but it was in a sense of if I wanted alone time, they would just, I bet they were still there, I just couldn't see them anymore, and they didn't talk.
What do you mean you could see what was behind them but couldn't see through them?
It's
Kind of like
really,
looking at a piece of glass? Would that?
no, because it's kind of weird because it's as if, it was as if you could wave your hand, somebody was waving their hand with two fingers up behind someone else's back, and you somehow could just know he's holding two fingers up behind his back like this, not like this, but you couldn't see through it. oddly enough.
What I thought of when Pagiel mentioned this, like, because I've only known Pagiel for, what, day and a half, 2 days. What I thought of, everybody remember Star Trek? Remember Star Trek? Remember how he used to beam me up, Scotty, and it would show all the model? You could see it through them, but yet you could see their whole form. That's what it sounds like to me. Does that make sense, Pedro? You could see their whole form, but yet you could see through them too.
It's
like
kind of
fog.
like that, but
Like what?
Fog.
Like fog. Yeah.
right. Yeah, it is kind of like that.
It's trying to put into words something that we're not designed to see.
Right. Yeah.
We're not designed to deal with, and that's really a big part of it. You know, I not to preach, but you know, if we go back to the Garden of Eden, if you know the story of Genesis and the fall of Adam and Eve, when they first took a bite of that fruit, something changed. Something happened to them, and they felt something they never should have felt. What they felt was shame. And they hid themselves, it says in the Bible, from God. And it must have been like a toddler hiding from her father, because they didn't do a very good job of it. But that shame drove them to hide from the only one they'd ever loved and had been loved by. They didn't know how to deal with that feeling of shame. Humans aren't equipped to carry that. And yet everybody here has carried that at some point in your life, and probably still do. And we're not meant to carry that. We're not designed for that. Shame is a result of sin in our life, and we're not supposed to carry it. Jesus came and took that willingly from us. The book of Hebrews says that he endured the cross, that he despised the shame. It was a terrible thing to put onto a holy God. And honestly, it's a terrible thing to put on any of us. We're not meant to carry it. But he gives us the opportunity to come to him. Jesus gives us the opportunity to call out to him and to ask him to be our Savior, to cry out, because he's the only hope we have. And that's the only way you'll get rid of the shame. Not hide from God, but to take it to him. As long as you're hiding from God, that shame will drive you to the lowest places. And for some, it'll drive you to put a gun to your head. That's just shame. And God never intended you to take that. And if we will turn and just go to him, he'll take it. Simple as that. Don't carry it.
Dave, you're talking about shame, but there's other things that God didn't intend it to be. You want to talk about that a little bit, as far as, let's just say, sexual abuse or anything else. That's
Keep
bad.
going. Yeah, I mean, any sin.
Right.
Not sure where you're going, but
Well, what I'm saying is, a lot of times things happen to people, and people say, "I can't believe in a God that would allow that."
oh yeah, for sure. Oh, there's sin in this world. There's no question about that. And like you said, sexual abuse in our society right now is huge. And people come from that with that feeling of shame, even though they're not the ones guilty of it. Again, we can battle ourselves, we can battle our own minds, we can battle the people who are involved. The only relief is to take it to Jesus. Don't hide it. Don't carry it. Just take it to him. And that, to say that sounds like, okay, what does that mean? How do you take it to Jesus? He's not physically, visibly, but that's what prayer is for, and that's what each of us are for. We do this together. You're never meant to do it alone, ever.
Right.
Ever. Not a counseling session, but a good old-fashioned Jesus session. Seriously.
I guess the point that I was really trying to get at is, there's bad things happen in this world, but
Yeah.
that's not God intended. Originally, when God created Adam and Eve in the garden, it was perfect.
Yes.
There was no shame, there was no sin, there was no pain.
And that's the way God intended it.
That's when God intended it. But when Adam and Eve sinned, now all these things that we see that affect us, whether it's being sexually abused or being, I don't know, somebody stealing from us or beating us up or whatever it is, or a divorce, all this hurt and heartache was not what God intended.
Yes, that's true.
It's because of sin. When sin entered the world, that's what happened.
And that's a result. It's a a result of that sin. And it's not going to go away. Our world's not going to get fixed. But we have a Jesus that can help us. And he'll carry us through this and walk through this with us. He won't even make the pain go away. Pagiel's going to live with blindness probably the rest of his life. It doesn't, the consequence of the sin isn't gone, but there's no punishment for it. Jesus has taken this pain of the sexual sin, or I'm sorry, that too, of the sin that's plagued his life, and took it off his shoulders, the shame that's been in his life, and took it off his shoulders. That hurts far more than a gunshot wound, far more than blindness. And so he can sit here today and say, he's blessed to be blind.
Speak of forgiveness, you know, I do prison ministry. I've done it for 11 years, and the biggest day is on Saturday when we talk about forgiveness, and we got to write down. We ask the inmates to write down their junk, anything they're unforgiven for, or anything they have unforgiveness for someone else. And in the script, we tell them that God loves the person they hate with the same amount of love that they love that person. But for me, I've been in recovery for almost 19 years from drugs and alcohol and self. But the two biggest words in my life are love and forgiveness. And where do those both come from? Jesus.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely
the
right.
thing is, if we don't forgive ourselves, you talked about regret and remorse, you might as well just walk up to God, punch him in the gut, and spit in his face, because he gave his son to die on a cross for us.
Yeah.
Even if it was, and one other thing I'd like to touch on real quick is that one of the nastiest, most hurtful sins in society today is gossip. Somebody talks about somebody else, and then by the time they're done, you could have a toothache, and by the time it's done, you lost your leg. You know, and it's ridiculous. Gossip is so hurtful. And but the biggest thing is forgiveness. We need to forgive ourselves first of all, because that's what Jesus did. He died for us because we're all sinners. We all fall short of the glory of God. But like I said, we can't correct them wrongs, but we can correct our future. We can do a different future.
I'm going to build on that just a little bit. And one of the problems we have in the American church throughout the country, and I don't know about where you folks might go, but there's a lot of teaching and preaching about the love of God, the love of Jesus, and it's absolutely true. And there's no way we can exaggerate it, because the truth of it is absolutely there. But Jesus loves us to take us out of sin, not to leave us there. There's too much of this teaching that you can continue to do whatever it is you want to do, and Jesus is just going to love you anyway. Pagiel talked about that. Oh, he'll forgive me. He'll love me. It's okay. No, it's not. If you're just going to continue in it, then you haven't found his love.
That's right.
He loves you in a way that takes you out of that sin, out of that shame, out of that turmoil, into a new life. He comes to give life and to give it more abundantly. And that's not talking about dollar bills flying out of the sky. That's talking about changing you from the sinful, shameful person that you've been in your life into a new creation, a new creature, a new person.
He wants
That's
us to be
huge.
just like this little girl right here in her grandma's arms, just being silent and snoring and just being a baby, you know.
Yeah.
We got to be new babes.
New.
I'm not her grandma, but
Well,
gosh.
Close enough.
Close enough.
Real quick, again, he mentioned again, echo location. One of the gifts that he got back was he prayed one night. Dave, tell him about him praying one night and what happened. Real quick.
Yeah. Well, maybe I should turn over the page, but I can start that if you want it. You can.
Well, what happened was, it was a Thursday night. I don't remember the exact date, but it was Thursday night last year. And I was sitting in my bed, and I wasn't exactly hopeless without it or anything like that, but I wanted my sight back. And so I prayed to God these words: Lord, can you please send me my sight back, even if I have to paint the world back somehow? And I didn't even think about echolocation in this sense. I just thought maybe literally, I don't know, everything I saw, I might be able to see again or something, if you will. But the next day, Mom came out with an entire textbook that teaches humans how to do echolocation. And this was written by one of the world's best echolocators. He travels to over 40 countries, been blind his whole life, but he travels to over 40 countries by himself, and probably has to advocate for himself to be left alone a lot. And I was given this textbook, and Mom started reading it, and so I decided to try it that same day. So I walked down the hall, just clicking my tongue like this, slowly. But then I was walking down the hall, and all of a sudden, I felt like I was really close to the door at the end of the hall. So I stopped, and I was like, huh, is that it? And I reached out and touched it, and I was dead on with it. And I feel like that was God's gift, because I've heard there's even stories of it in the textbook that with echolocation, it's not always you can do it the first time perfectly. Sometimes it would take up to about 5 tries or so to get to a wall. And I've learned even more if I keep practicing with it now. Eventually, it may, if I put the hard work into it, it may get to the point where I don't need to walk around with a cane any longer.
Oh. But that's your self-defense against David sometimes.
Well, see, that's the thing.
Bruises to prove it.
He'll probably leave me alone if I don't have my cane. Because he'll be like, oh, I can see him. He's just walking around to and fro. He's got it.
What echolocation does is your eyes that we use are just lenses that filter light and see, they see the light, and they take those images of light and shadows, and it sends it to the brain, and the brain interprets the light into visual images of objects and distances and faces and so on. When you lose your sight and you begin to use the echolocation, it begins to take those sounds and it sends it to not just your hearing part of the brain, but it actually sends it back to the visual cortex, and the brain actually begins to see using the sounds. And so it's actually giving him visible, physical, visible sight. Black and white, or black. But objects, slightly blurry, but objects are very much in front of him, very clear.
Like right now, if I were to get up and click at this chair, what I would see kind of is as if it were painted entirely black, and I probably at this stage right now wouldn't be able to see the handles to it because they're too thin for me at the moment, but I would be able to see kind of a
basic shape.
right.
But for your eyes, they can't see a thing.
They can't. One is missing and the other is totally blind. If you wave a flashlight in front of my face, I wouldn't be able to tell.
We've tried it, actually.
Have you now? I didn't actually know about that.
He did say that for some reason he can't sleep if the light is on.
Yes, that is something odd, and I feel like, because the doctors did tell me that my optical nerve is still connected to my brain, so my guesstimation would be that perhaps my eye is actually absorbing everything it sees still, my brain's just not processing it anymore.
It's amazing your brain processes anything.
'Cause, I mean, even, like, sometimes it is interesting because I feel like it's too often to be a coincidence. We'll be riding down the road and I'll all of a sudden start talking about Walmart and we just passed one. Or even I think it was either today or yesterday, I sat down in a recliner and they asked me, what color do you think that is? And I think I guessed it spot on.
Yep.
We did.
Any other questions for Pagiel or Dave?
What it's like to be blind, or it's just hard to imagine. Well, if I sit in the smoke a little longer, maybe. I don't know.
Well, actually, to be honest, for anyone who is curious, no joke, I can actually tell you to blindfold yourself and teach you a little bit about using a cane to walk around.
The cane's
Right.
a lot longer than I thought it would be.
Well, I'm a tall dude, and I'll tell you, the way a cane is they're not all the same. You've got to get them adjusted for your height. And in America, we do it here. I've also got one that's from Japan that goes up to here.
Wow.
This one I use for whenever I skateboard.
He
Yeah.
does.
He does.
Oh yeah. After I was blind.
He couldn't do it before.
I
but
can't even
Wow.
skateboard.
But you see, unlike all those other skateboarders, you know, I'm not doing all this, you know, like the and no, I'm doing the coolest trick of all. Watch this. Oh, there's a curb. That's the coolest trick I need.
That's awesome.
You know, if you guys, I mean, you know, I deal with kids all the time, and you never know when they're maybe thinking about suicide. But if you guys, younger people, if you know people that are thinking about committing suicide, they need hope, you know, and Dave wrote this book. I'd like to give it to you as a gift. If you know somebody else that needs to read this book, please let me know, and I'll give you an extra one. I'm gonna pay Dave. I'll keep track. I'll keep track of Dave. I'll pay you. But if you know somebody else, please, you know, Pagiel, what's the statistic on suicide in 2018?
In 2018, and remember, there's a lot.
Speak up.
There-
Complain.
In 2018, and remember, there's a lot of people in America. It went up 30%.
30% in 1 year went up. There's a young man that I tried to get to come here tonight, and he lost his dad and his brother within 6 weeks this spring. And I just found out tonight that his brother actually committed suicide. I didn't know that. I didn't know what happened.
Wow.
And he was very close to his brother. I wish he could have been here. I think he needs to hear this. But you know, if you know somebody that you think this book might help, please let me know and take an extra one.
And Roger, you mentioned young people, and it's not just young people.
I know, but I guess my point for my heart is, you know, I look at
Yeah, you're a school
Zoe,
teacher,
Alex,
so that
Jack,
yeah.
you know, they're in touch, and I think the younger generation is more hopeless than the older generation. They've got so much more to deal with than what we have, and so that's why I say younger. You know,
Yep.
I mean, you're younger too.
Yeah.
But, you know, I guess I'm thinking anything from 13 to 30. There's a real hopelessness out there.
Oh, I know.
You've been there, huh?
I've seen quite a bit of it.
Yeah. So anyway,
Thank you.
I'll keep track.
No, you
You
can't.
should have one of those counters like at the ticket counter.
And Sherilyn's going to do an audio copy for us.
I'm hoping so. I might actually get through it then.
I can read it to you guys right now. Why won't you let me?
Okay.
I can read the big words, that's why.
You guys all get one.
Yeah, we'll take one for the family. Yeah.
Need any more?
No.
Well,
no,
to keep
but
a
I'll
track,
probably
give me
this
4.
one away.
But you know, if you guys want to stick around and enjoy the fire, we got lots more to eat. Please do. I love having people back here.
And
If you have
Pa-
any more questions for Pagiel or Dave,
And Pagiel, I mean, we've been asking him all kinds of
we
stuff.
have.
He's up for it.
I'm up for it. Anything that you want answered, honestly, I'll tell you about the soft, fuzzy stuff in my life or the nitty gritty.
You know, the one thing that the book
so
brought out that I
cute.
thought was interesting is after Pagiel shot himself, his mom is in there rubbing his back. Dave, go ahead and tell us, please.
You're talking about the very end of that chapter, yeah. Yeah, there was a point where, I mean, you can just imagine a mother finding her son lying on a heap on the floor in the barn with a gun beside him.
And literally, his one eye was blown out of his head.
Yeah,
Oh,
his
yeah.
eye hanging.
But-
He was still conscious, sitting on his heart because he had moved himself because he didn't want to make a bloody mess in the hay.
Right. I felt bad about that
Yeah.
for some reason.
In a barn.
Yeah.
Wow.
So anyway, she sat there with him waiting for the ambulance and was able to look over in the corner and see what, in her words, these are her words describing a ghastly image of a demon sitting in the corner looking very satisfied with himself. And
The demon had accomplished exactly what he wanted.
done what he'd set out to do.
And this was before she knew about this.
She didn't know anything about him.
Right.
In fact, that was written before she knew anything about him.
Oh, really? From her diary. Interesting.
A good portion of the book, I don't know what percentage, but a good portion of the book comes directly from her personal diaries, which is very personal.
And there's some pictures in there showing Pagiel, you know, throughout life and after he shot himself. You see pictures with his bandage on his head and the whole shot.
I had some friends that was working with me, and his son was going to start working. I got a big project up in Oscoda, hanging all of these condos, hanging the drywall. And this kid had his girlfriend over, and I didn't know he was into coke. And then he'd been dealing with some coke, and they were partying all night. And he asked his girlfriend, "Go get me something to eat," and she said no. Well, he took his 9 and put it to his head, and was messing, and he ended up not messing. He ended up killing himself right there in the house because she wouldn't go get him something to eat, you know. And he was playing with that gun and blew his stinking head off. It's serious stuff out there.
It used to be rare, but I bet everybody here knows somebody who's committed suicide.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I come to find out, my dad passed away. I was going through his paperwork that his adopted mother killed herself, and I remember when she died when I was 11, but I didn't know she took her own life.
Wow.
So yeah, it happens a lot. I wish we had more time to go into it, but my wife and daughter, they can discern evil spirits. I can't. I mean, I can't see them, but they can. And when I started doing prison ministry, I'd go into the prison, and they'd see this dark figure walk down the hallway when I wasn't home. And one time, Michelle says I was in the prison, and Buddy was laying on the end of the bed, and he was laying there, and his hair stood up, and there was nobody around. We lived out in the country, and you could tell if there was anybody around. And so, yeah, evil spirits are real.
Oh, yeah, they're real. Yeah, no question. No question.
And that's the thing, is they don't always come as these, in the movies and stuff, we always see them as these gaunt, terrifying things that are just out to straight up kill you themselves. Truth be told, they want to come to you as friends. In fact, from my experience, if you will, Satan can be the most charming, nice, friendly guy ever, and then as soon as you got your back turned enough, he'll stab you.
Pagiel, I do have a question. You said numerous times they look just like you. Did they look like you, facial features, or look like you as in the way you dressed? You with the hoodies? You said they had hoodies on.
Both.
So they look just like you physically, and they dress like you too.
Yes, sir. Though I will say at the time, my facial features started to change badly. Like I started to look like a character from the show Mr. Robot, known as Elliot Alderson. I started to look, if not just like him, like his twin brother. But they looked like my healthy self.
Hey, Michelle, tell them about Timmy and Tommy. Tell them. Come on, tell them, hurry. Quick story.
Well,
Come on.
yeah, okay. My little sister had what she called her ghost friends, and their names were Timmy and Tommy. And they hung out with her on the farm, and she was quite a bit younger than us. And they'd come and go. And one day they left. She said that they were going to go to California to be with some other kids, and they were just gone. And my daughter, who also is gifted with discerning spirits, I knew what she was seeing and what she wasn't seeing and when she was, and but she had these two friendly friends that she called her ghost friends. So one day I asked her what their names were, and she said their names were Timmy and Tommy.
And how many years apart was this?
30 some years. And when they left to go to California to be with some other children that needed them. So,
It's not anything to play with.
Uh-uh.
nope, it's not.
The Bible says that he travels around seeking who he may devour, and he comes
right.
to kill, steal, and destroy. And he's doing a good job of it.
And
No.
he's not up in your face about it either. He's not, if you want my honesty, this is what we tend to forget a lot, even with criminals, just your plain criminal, is they're actually oftentimes intelligent. They just don't make good decisions.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I mean, I would say that the devil is very, very intelligent, but so evil.
Comes in many forms and many ways, and
But yeah, if you have questions for Pagiel, we have been grilling him for 2 days, and he's very open to questions.
gonna
and
be
any
glad